Hey everyone, welcome back to the Thoughtstream. This is episode 2 of the only Exodus player made podcast. I am Victor, aka Roland Wright, and today I'm once again joined by Alex.
Some of you might know me as Horchata.
Yeah, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about the kind of blog posts that Existence Games has been making and what our thoughts and takes are on that, as well as the qualifiers that are going to be happening this month, May 2019, as well as the Season 3 format, which was announced in the latest magazine. So let's go ahead and jump on into this. Recently, Existence Games put out another blog post, and this one kind of bothered myself and you as well, right?
Yeah, and I don't think we're the only ones. When I was reading through the Discord, it definitely seemed to ruffle some players' feathers, and then it did spark quite a big debate within the Discord server.
Yeah, and part of that is because the tone of this blog post, I think, is kind of all over the place, and most notably, not very. Well, actually, it's pretty condescending, at least at the beginning of the post.
Right, that's exactly the word I was thinking too. The businessman in me gets pretty unhappy to hear a fellow business person saying that their customers are doing something wrong with the product.
Hmm.
They said this set was a test, and as a whole, the player base failed the test.
Hmm.
That kind of makes me unhappy because, you know, as a very spiky player myself, um, if I find a deck that works, and consistently wins, I don't really see a reason to want to change it too much, especially to something that is unproven and is not as likely to have me win.
Yeah, exactly. And just to kind of quote them here, they said you were being tested and you didn't even know it. We were looking for two things: for players to explore the format, testing as many different unique card combinations as possible, and be willing to improve upon popular builds by making innovative changes. And I think both of those bullet points are really important. And this is why I'm kind of confused because, as far as the local scene in Fresno, which is where Existence Games is located, both of these bullet points had been completely like satisfied every week. I would say maybe 80-90% of the people there are playing a different deck, and the people who are making the already proven deck lists have changed them. Angel Beatdown isn't the same Angel Beatdown it was last year. Like, the creatures changed. So I'm really confused on who exactly they're talking to here, because like we said, they're kind of talking down to the competitive players who are just playing the same decks, but at the same time they're completely ignoring the amount of people who have been experimenting.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if maybe in some of the other play groups that are in like Europe, or I think there's some in Singapore. I forget where they all are mostly based. I'm wondering if maybe they're even less likely to do the experimenting.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't. They don't make those card lists or those deck lists public, so
Yeah,
I don't see
precisely.
them. I don't see them posting out on Facebook like they did towards the very beginning, but before they would post every tournament's deck lists, especially the winners, on Facebook, but they've backed off from doing that, which I think is kind of fair because I think they do mention in this particular article that they reserve the right to, but they also want to respect that certain people are brewing and trying to not
Yeah.
show their hand before qualifiers.
Yeah, and at the very least they admit that it's a kind of a difficult decision. um, Being open about this kind of stuff is beneficial in the sense that it allows everyone to grow, but it also means that you're more motivated to keep your deck list secret, to not take them to tournaments and stuff like that. I think if anything, this kind of falls on the player base to decide where they want to go with that. If you look at any other major TCG, you know, uh, game store owners aren't really posting the deck list for the winner at every tournament they have. It's the player who might make a YouTube video or has a blog or submits it to a larger blog for that game. The actual If I subscribe to Wizards of the Coast's Twitter or Facebook page, they're not posting deck lists from the top players every week. They might do it after a regional or something like that, but it's not that often, and it's primarily because it's not an easy decision, and it's probably better off if the player base do that.
Right. But back to the overall discussion about the blog post, it's up to the players to decide exactly how they want to play the game. And as creators, they should enable them to continue to play that they want to play, but not necessarily try to prescribe
Mm-hmm.
that to the players.
And someone in that conversation had brought up a good point, which is, does the lack of diversity in the competitive scene, at this point, really the top decks are Beatdown, either Angel, Shard, or Shard Folk Reveal, um, and well, that's pretty much it. It's Angel, Shard Folk, and Reveal. Um, those are the top decks, and is the problem more that it's on? Well, it should be on the developer essentially. Like if the game designer isn't the one breeding the ability to have these varied strategies, it's on them, not like the players. It's not like nobody's experimenting. As you said at the start of this, people are going to play what they know works. And if it's going to work is the same deck that's been working for the last year, 2 years, then yeah, I mean, like, why? I went to tournaments running a different deck every week for almost the entire year. And the only tournaments I ever won were tournaments that I was running beatdown or where none of the good players showed up.
Right. So another thing that kind of adds on top of that is even if there are really good combinations that people haven't found, I'm not necessarily sure that that's because of lack of trying on the player's part. Because I do definitely believe that, from my experience going to locals at Fresno, which I did consistently for multiple years, people were always willing to experiment.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, I was probably one of the more egregious examples of people always bringing the same deck, but I would still, try to practice building a bunch of different decks on my own free time. But I just liked winning at tournaments and getting the prizes. So
Mm-hmm.
I would always bring Angel Beatdown because that was in the end, the one that always won.
Yeah, and that's the same thing that happens at every trading card game. You have the players who just want to win, so they're going to come with the deck that has been proven to be the strongest. And essentially, you rely on other players to discover the meta breaking or the meta defining decks for you. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Everyone has their different way they want to enjoy the game. But like if I show up to a tournament and every week I now consistently beat Angel Beatdown, I can guarantee you that you're going to start seeing people using whatever deck I built, and that's how Angel Beatdown probably became a thing in the first place. Is somebody had to have brought that original deck list, that specific 2021 card deck list, one repeatedly, and then everyone else started building the same thing. And you'll see that in any trading card game, any game, and it's a huge part of the community is like online net decks and stuff like that. And um, I think everyone has tried their best to find something new, and that's why I kind of look towards existence games as like, I'm pretty sure there aren't any. I'm pretty sure there's nothing else. I think we did explore the set and the current game as best as we could, and a good example of this is the fact that in that blog post they made a deck list. They said like, well, we're going to start releasing new combinations every month or whatever now to kind of nudge you guys along. And so they released a Starbringer deck list. The deck is bad, and competitively, you know, the deck, I'm sure it's a deck. I mean, I'm sure it's like, it can be played against someone else who's messing around. But at the end of the day, this is not a competitive deck. You're not going to win any qualifier or world championship with this deck. And I think that's a sign that maybe they look at themselves as the best players in their game. And so this blog post kind of reflects that idea where they doubt the player base's ability to find to find the combinations that are working When in reality, I think we have, and that's just Angel Beatdown or Beatdown in general right now in Reveal.
One personal experience I have with that idea of them being the best players is that occasionally they would show up to tournaments as hosts and we would have opportunities to play against them, and they would almost always have some sort of like homebrewed deck that
Yeah,
they made and that wasn't super meta. And so playing against them, it was, as a player, not too hard to win, but like I could understand that they were, trying new things and always just showing other players that there are a lot of different combinations that could be made. And sometimes they hit upon something that was really good, and sometimes it was just something that was a cool deck idea, like dimensional, and trying to make that work. But I feel like as a player, I've never really actually been able to play against them at their best. So I feel like it's kind of unproven that they are the definitive answer on like what kind of decks work, because I haven't had a chance to really play. They don't play tournaments in a way of trying to win. So as a spiky
hmm
player myself, someone who does want to win, it is kind of hard for me to just buy in and say, as the creators, they must be right. They must have really great deck ideas that I haven't thought of and combinations that I can't beat
yeah,
because I haven't seen them.
yeah. And I think this all comes around to kind of my main point after reading this blog post was that why does this post exist? Because they they are kind of criticizing the player base when they're not really a part of the player base. They're not, they're not playing competitively. And they really shouldn't. I mean, as a game designer, you typically forfeit the ability to be fully competitive in a game, because if you ever are, then people will be like, well, you designed the game, you're just making cards that work for you or whatever, right? That.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And also on top of that, most of the times the game designers are not the same personality as the people who are the most competitive,
Yeah,
anyways.
exactly. Yeah, very true. And it's kind of a profession, I think, where you're designing a game for other people to enjoy and not necessarily for your own benefit, right? And this is kind of weird because I think, Exodus was a game they designed to play with each other. It makes sense that, their whole tagline is made by card game players for card game players. And I think that's fine. But this whole thing is kind of like a PR nightmare, for a larger company, this whole blog post. What it really should have been was, hey, we've been recognizing a problem within, the community. We're not really happy with where deck building has gone and kind of how it's been stagnant, and we're looking for ways to improve upon this in future sets so there's more diversity. That's essentially what they should have said. They need to explain what they're not happy with, but not point fingers at the players for it, which is just really weird, especially when, like I said at the start, that's not even true. We have been experimenting. It's just the experiments have failed. They've all failed, you know? Um, and
I
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'd like to add, I don't even think that there necessarily needs to be disappointment or unhappiness with how things have gone. I think that as creators, they definitely have the opportunity to say, okay, so this is the direction that the game is going. Let's adapt to that and look forward to the future of how we can push things to go in the future. Like, this isn't a wasted opportunity. Like, they haven't really lost anything because players haven't been playing
hmm
in like new ways or trying to create the combinations that they think are really overpowered or like really powerful and deserve a spot in the meta. This is just an opportunity for them to design things around that in the future. But the way that they write it, it feels as a player, like you said, condescending, and just kind of, it doesn't make me feel good. And I think that's something that they should have gone for as a company who's trying to sell us something, is in the end, you should be trying to make the players feel more excited about what's coming up in the future and less disappointed with how things have been so far.
Yeah, and I think this kind of goes back to something I've noticed with them is I feel like they feel the need to always defend themselves. We start with their podcast about Existence of Unknown Origins before it came out. I know their first blog post I think also talked about that a lot, and then now this blog post is talking about, we have this kind of stagnant meta right now, which last season was way worse. I
Oh,
mean,
oh, so much
yeah,
worse.
last season was infinitely worse. At least in this one, Angel Beatdown has like three different flavors to it. Shardfolk has two pretty viable beatdown strategies. Reveal is interesting and all that stuff. And there are definitely like a lot more B tier decks as well, and I think that's cool. It allows locals to have a lot of variety. There's a lot of cool things going on with this set, and as you said, it's like they really didn't. They don't really need to acknowledge that there's a problem. They're it's just we things have improved. So that's
Hmm.
another reason why like this kind of blog post didn't really need to happen. I think they just felt the need like to defend their game, to defend themselves. I think that's a trap that a lot of business owners fall in. Like a good example of this that you can watch is like a show like Kitchen Nightmares, where Chef Gordon Ramsay goes to different restaurants that are struggling to help them. Like 9 times out of 10, the reason the restaurant's failing is because the business owner refuses to accept that there's a problem.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
they're never wrong. Everything they do is right. Their food is amazing or whatever. I think that's kind of the same here is, and I have talked to the creator. I've had the good fortune of talking to the creators a lot over the last year and a half I've been playing the game, and I can honestly say I don't think they've ever admitted to making a mistake. You know,
Yeah.
and obviously, like as a in a one-on-one conversation, it's kind of awkward. But I think a blog post, if they were truly really concerned about the format being very unexplored, I think it should be, we clearly haven't done a good enough job at making um, I don't want to say obvious strategies, but making it so that players can better. I mean, like you don't see this problem in other games. Other games certainly have hundreds of times more players, but at the end of the day, like um, you as the game designer, it's up to you to help kind of direct the players to the direction you want the game to go in. You can't force it. You can't put out,
Exactly.
40 rare cards with all these different abilities, or if you're including uncommons too, even more than that. You can't put out all these like a shotgun and just say, look at all these cool strategies we just gave you, because a lot of them like a in the first place aren't even that good, but b there's just like if there's a proven strategy it's just going to win tournaments. I can explore all I want, but unless I'm being directed in a specific direction, it's not really going to do much for me. Like this Starbringer deck, it's cool, but what is unique about the deck? Only Starbringer. Like
Yeah.
everything else is very generic, and it's a symptom of the symmetry toolbox being so meta right now,
Yeah.
as well as there's just not a lot of combos that really matter here. But yeah, so it's just really weird blog posts. I hope I hope they can kind of take from the feedback they got from this blog post, and maybe in the future we don't see something like this again. Um,
Yeah. I definitely think that in the future, it would benefit them a lot to take a more positive outlook on it as an
yeah,
opportunity for the future and less of a disappointment of the past. And then to kind of build off of what you were saying or what we were talking about towards the very beginning is people do experiment, right?
hmm
And just because it's not happening at tournaments doesn't mean that they necessarily need to be disappointed with the lack of new stuff going on. If you and I play Exodus together and we're both being casual about it, we're not practicing for a qualifier or anything, then we'll definitely try different stuff just because that's fun, and we both recognize that even though it's not the most competitive thing, we like to build different decks because it's part of the fun of the game. And I'm wondering if maybe they aren't taking that into as deep consideration when writing an article like this. Is like just because it's not a tournament doesn't necessarily mean that kitchen table games aren't involving a lot of different brewing. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I played on Tabletop Simulator to kind of test different strategies as well. And as I mentioned in Discord, at the end of the day, like these tournaments, that's where you win mats. That's where you get seasonal points. It's where you win, signed rares and stuff like that. You're not necessarily going to see a lot of players like openly go to these tournaments with a deck that they're probably going to lose with. Um, they do say like, I'm looking back in the first paragraph, they do say like a lot of players are doing new decks on a weekly basis, but some are playing the same deck, and there's no right or wrong answer. But then, I think the general tone of the blog post kind of speaks contradictory to that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Hopefully, in the future, they can, like you said, learn from the feedback that they're getting and take a different attitude towards it. I do like when they make blog posts in general. I do like the communication with them. Um, yeah, I just definitely think this one was probably like a miss.
Yeah.
Just kind of missed the mark.
Can't always be hits, but yeah. Hopefully they kind of learn from this. I still think the best way to kind of handle it is to just never blame the player base.
That's a good point.
Because all this stuff ultimately comes down to you as a game designer. If you blame everyone for always, why is every deck run Alana? You guys gotta stop using Alana. Maybe it's a sign that Alana is really powerful, right? Or maybe it's a sign that Vortex was designed too strong. It's stuff like that. So, all right. So with that said, let's go ahead and move on to our second topic, which is qualifiers. Is this month? I think it's actually in like 2 weeks. Yeah, 2.5 weeks from now.
What's the exact date again?
I
The
think
25th?
25th, 26th, something like that.
Alrighty.
Yeah, are you going to be going to yours?
It looks like I will be. That is in LA, I believe. At Strategicon?
Yeah, the West Coast qualifiers in LA, and as far as I've seen, it looks like there's potentially three. There's a West Coast, there's an East Coast, and I think there's one in Singapore.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah. Um, what's interesting about this is last year we went to the qualifier. It was only in LA. There was only a qualifier in LA. We saw a pretty low turnout. But the thing is like when the World Championship came around, there were a lot of players who from the Fresno area that were going to the World Championship. But there were also a lot of players from other parts of the world who also earned the right to go to World Championship, and they didn't show. None of them. I mean, one guy showed. And I'm afraid that'll happen again because at the end of the day, the World Championship isn't a prize. You're not winning $10,000 because if you're looking at a Yu-Gi-Oh or a Pokemon World Championship, your travel expenses, you're going there with the intent to win and potentially cover your expenses, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Here you're just going there for kind of fun, bragging rights. Like the prizes are cool, don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But they're not making up for if you're flying from Singapore all the way to Los Angeles, California. That's a over $1,000 flight
Yeah.
and hotel.
I also have the same concern. I hope that it will not be the case. Looking at the top 10, I actually don't recognize quite a few people on the list.
Yeah,
so that makes me pretty happy.
We've heard, some of those people are having 2 tournaments a week. And so they're able to generate like a lot of points really fast. Also, at some of the conventions they gave people like 20 or 30 points, which jumped them really high.
I see.
In the year. But yeah, I'm hopeful that some of these people can take the leap and come out to Worlds because it is a very fun. It was a very fun 2 days last year. But as far as qualifiers go, hopefully it's in 3 different places. This allows people to kind of get more invested in the season. And also, for those of you who don't know, if you come in the first 3 places of your qualifiers, you're guaranteed an invite to Worlds. Now, that's different than last year, which I think last year was the top 4 at each qualifier. This year's top 3, which is pretty low. It also sucks because I don't know why they do this, But the person who wins first, I think gets like 30 points. The person who wins second gets 20. The person who wins third gets an additional 10. And then everyone else there gets 10 points. I don't know why they give bonus points to coming in first, second, and third. Because you're already guaranteed an invite, and now they could potentially push someone else off of the top list, top 25 or
Ah,
whatever. So
but
like,
what I remember from last year is I believe I got first in the qualifier, and my spot just got passed down for the ranking. So I was the number one ranked
hmm,
player at the end of the season. But since I qualified, I my points ranking like invitation slot went down to like the next person.
yeah, that's true.
So I don't think anybody will get kind of like knocked off if somebody like swoops in at the last moment and gets a qualifier and gets a bunch of points from it. I think that it does kind of add more legitimacy to the person getting an invitation, because if you're able to win a qualifier, which is supposed to be a big deal, then you'll show up higher on the rankings, and it's not just some 3 point nobody who somehow got an invitation. You see that they are established with a good 30 points, which it puts them around where everybody else who is going to get an invitation. They're
Hmm.
about the same level in that case, I think.
Good point. And I'm actually looking at the Facebook page events right now. I only see an East and West Coast. I do not see a Singapore qualifier.
Hmm.
So it's actually these. And funnily enough, the uh, West Coast qualifier is on May 25th. The East Coast is on May 11th. It's this weekend.
Ooh, exciting.
So some of those peeps will be up there a little early. Um, I think like you said, adding legitimacy. It also adds a sense of urgency where like people really feel like they have to kind of go to these to the qualifiers now because you could potentially get bumped out. Like I'm like number 5 or 6 right now on the leaderboards. If a bunch of people go to these qualifiers, there's 6 guaranteed slots essentially, and everyone else who goes there is getting 10 extra points. That could potentially bump a lot of people down if enough people go to these things, right?
Yeah, especially if they're at the edge of around 25, 30 points. There's still a few more weeks of a good amount of weeks of
Mm-hmm.
getting points from tournaments to go to. If you go to one of these qualifiers, and even if you don't win or place, you'll still get 10 points, and that could boost you up
Mm-hmm.
quite a good amount. So I definitely agree with you. It adds urgency to really make people want to come out, which I
Yeah,
appreciate.
yeah. I think they've definitely. I think it's a pretty fair and balanced system. Now I say that, but if I was the one who got bumped off the list, I probably wouldn't be thinking that. But I think if you just go to the qualifier and you get those 10 free points, even if you don't place in the top three, I think it's still pretty hard for anyone to bump you off at that point as long as you're still active within the game. So
Yeah,
you know, and then the prizes this year are have been upped. Last year it was just you got a full play set of all the promos released. This year it's a little different. Top three get the invitation in the worlds. They also get a medal certificate of their accomplishment, which sounds interesting.
ooh,
The person who comes in first gets a champion playmat as usual. Both them and the person who gets in second gets a Galaxy Tides booster box. Um,
nice.
Top four get a Converging Chasms booster box, and top eight gets artist signed cards. Random assortment of artist signed cards are also raffled. All participants receive the full playset of promo cards, um, and all participants also receive a large poster of set 3 and set 4, which is cool. I don't think I have any set 4 posters, or I might have one. I'm not sure. But the booster boxes is pretty sweet because
Yeah,
that's a lot of money that they actually are kind of giving up here. Let's see. In total, that's 6 booster boxes they're giving out. They're $40 each. So that's $240 at two different qualifying tournaments. You're looking at over $480 that they're giving out. Very nice.
yeah, they definitely do spoil their players for such a
Small, small
small
kind of
company.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I think that's one of probably their strongest points as a company is they're always willing to go above and beyond to like try to benefit their players for participating. You don't really see that kind of love from Wizards of the Coast or Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh.
Yeah.
So that's great. And
Usually those games kind of put it on the store owner to do those things at that point.
right. And that's kind of getting unsustainable at this point from what I hear in Magic the Gathering news.
Yeah.
But then also, on top of that, I don't necessarily know that would be losing out on sales from giving these out, because if I was a newer player who needed new cards, getting something like a booster box just makes me want to play the game more and keeps me around, is more likely to keep me around longer as a player. So I think it's a good investment on their behalf.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty satisfied with the prizes. So that's it for. Well, actually, real quick, talking about our experience at the last qualifier. Like I said, it was pretty small. I know there was you, me, and two others from Fresno, and then there were, I think, four people from the area, from the LA area that was there.
Mm.
Um, as far as decks go, uh, I will say that, people who are kind of playing outside of our locals in that area, they didn't have really impressive decks.
I do remember that. I remember there being a little bit of contention between a couple of the players because actually I don't remember it super well, but I do remember that.
Well, there was one player who wasn't used to kind of the what the meta game is, and so they're playing cards that they're used to winning in their local scene, and then they're getting completely shut down by things like Crystal Cove, or even like first turn Vortex and stuff like that, and they weren't happy because you play in your local, you kind of build this ecosystem or this sphere where that's what you're used to. That's the game that you're used to, and then suddenly you're playing people at another level that kind of show you like, no, the game can go way beyond that. I was unfortunate in the sense that I didn't get to play. I think there was one player there who he actually came in, I think third, who was playing a dimensional deck, which I've pretty much never played against since
Uh-huh.
dimensionals are really bad. But he was actually pretty good. I was really hoping to play him. I really want to play out of our local scene and play other people and see their decks and see what people have working in other areas. So I'm hoping at the West Coast qualifier to see that this year.
I'm hoping for that too. I think I'm pretty lucky in a way and unlucky because as I have been taking a hiatus from playing in local tournaments just because I'm out of town, I will not be as familiar
Yeah.
with the meta. So having the opportunity to come to it as an outsider and seeing what's changed and actually getting my hands dirty with playing against people should be pretty fun.
Yeah, everything will be new to you.
Yeah, but I feel like I'm still pretty happy with my chances because I don't if the game's changed enough to really spin my head too much. We'll see.
Yeah, I think next set, I think the game will definitely change more significantly than set four did, because as I mentioned in the last podcast, set four was really about expanding on the existing ideas in the game, and set five looks to be more about adding a ton more ideas and options to the game. It's kind of like you release an odd number set that starts this baseline, and then the even number set following it supports the baseline, and then that cycle just continues to repeat.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, moving on, let's go ahead and talk about what season three looks like, which
Exciting, exciting.
I think I briefly talked to you about. But season three, obviously season three is going to have set five in it, which is a big deal. But also season three is going to introduce team multiplayer 2v2 formats in the actual like competitive scene. The World Championship in 2020 will be 2v2 games.
That seems like a hugely I don't I guess to put it in a raunchy term, ballsy move on their part because in the past 2v2's been somewhat of an unsupported format, kind of hard to uh like now I don't want to say hard to play, but it definitely didn't feel like it had the refinement needed for competitiveness. So, that's a big statement on their half, saying this is definitely a direction that we want the game to be taken in, and this set is definitely going to add the support that makes it possible.
Yeah, it definitely kind of comes out of nowhere since even in the Fresno locals, we've never had a tournament that's 2v2.
Actually, there was one, I think that was before you started playing.
Oh yeah, but
This was
that's,
a
you're looking at 2016 or 2017,
I think it might have been as early as 2015.
Yeah. So
This was back during set 2. Oh, good times, but
so yeah, it's definitely like a kind of a big gamble. I mean, maybe they've done play testing with like, two other people or three other people or something like that, but to kind of make this jump out of nowhere is interesting. I don't think necessarily it's the direction they want to take the game. I think more of anything they want to just spice things up a little bit because, as they say in the magazine when they're talking about the format, they're essentially saying that like tournaments will still be back and forth kind of between 1-on-1 and 2v2. Like, they're not going to force everyone the entire season to only play 2v2.
thank
You're
goodness.
still going to be able to play
Because
1v1. But yeah, the 2v2 rules also are going to be kind of complicated, as we've mentioned. Exodus has a lot of ruling issues, kind of just because of how broad everything's worded and stuff like that.
yeah,
Um, in this one, we have each team will have two players. Teams will share 10 life points and have a single field, but you alternate turns and you'll still have your own separate hands. So there's a lot of funky things here. Um, like, are they going to share the same afterthought zone? Because that's a big deal. If you're sharing the same field, there's a lot of interesting combinations that you can kind of do there, but there's also a lot of other weird interactions. I think, like
yeah,
for instance, like Vortex, for instance, it doesn't force an entire team to discard their hand. It just forces you to kind of choose another player, and both of you and them discard their hand, similar to how like a larger multiplayer game works.
uh huh.
Also, games will be only played as a best of one and not best two of three.
That's something that I find to be somewhat concerning because with basically any competitive uh, game, whether it be sports, whether it be video games or card games, the more rounds that you have per game, the more consistently that the better
Yeah,
players will win.
yeah,
So, on the one hand, you could have something like baseball where you play 7 games in the finals or the World Series. And then on the other hand, you could have something like football where a different team wins every year because it's a best of one
yeah.
towards the end. So, yeah, as a player who wants the better players to win, regardless of if that is me, I want the players who are like the best of the best to be the champions. I get a little worried that best of one rounds are going to be pretty decisive or pretty random, I guess.
Well, it does add like this weird element where you can build a deck that's all about being fast and just a shock, like a surprise. And when you're playing against someone, that first game that you play against them, they might beat you simply because you have no idea what's in their deck,
Yeah,
and they just bring out something, and you're like, oh, I wish I knew they had that because I would have done something different. A good example is like if you're playing someone and you don't know if they have existence of unknown origin in their deck or not, you're much more hesitant to drop them down to 1 or 2 life because for all you know they have that card, they have Treeforge Complex or something like that. It could be your last turn. But once
yeah,
you know they don't have it, you don't have that worry anymore. So playing a best of one really adds this element of, yeah, I can totally run like a bunch of cards that are, one-time tricks that my opponent's not going to know they're in there. Um, I think also like both players can run like double ephemera, so your odds of just getting this massive lead at the start, um, are there because you have essentially four ephemeras to potentially draw from.
yes, but at the same time, a direct counter to ephemera is just vortex, and everybody's going to be running that anyways. Whoever gets an ephemera off and draws cards for it, one of the players just bites the bullet and says, "All right, I'm going to vortex your hand before you can play anything."
Yeah, but the opposite is true that both of those players might have a cove.
That's a good point.
Additionally, a mulligan rule shall be introduced for this format only. Players are allowed to pick any cards from their starting hand, shuffle them back into their deck, and redraw the same number of cards once each before the game begins. Once again, allowing you to be like, oh, I have double ephemera, or I don't have double ephemera. Time to reshuffle my hand and potentially draw another one.
Fair enough.
And then, like, on top of that, it's like, okay, I have two ephemeras in my hand. Well, I'll just reshuffle the third card and hope I get a cove or something, you know? Um, so, yeah, the mulligan rule really is interesting. I think that the mulligan rule exists to kind of alleviate what you said, which is to alleviate the odds that you lose because you're like, you have a bad starting hand, for instance, which definitely happens. I mean, if you open your first starting hand is like two coves and an invoke, and your opponent manages to pull off some like insane Lazarus play on turn two, like you're just gonna lose.
Yeah.
But if you can mulligan, you can avoid those issues.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so and the other kind of weird thing with this is they're gonna try and make it thematic with this like Chrono War. Um, if you're on the same you and your partner, you're either playing a chrono deck or an eventide deck. So like if my deck has chrono creatures in it, I can't have any other creatures in the deck.
It's definitely a really interesting direction to go in. I think that just because of the sheer amount of change that's going into the next season, there's going to be a big shift in the meta, and things might, maybe temporarily, they might balance out in ways that we're not used to as players. Because right now, like we've discussed, the meta's been pretty stagnant. Even just from the inception of the game, Vortex has always been really strong since Galaxy Tides came out. Alana's been a really good pick almost all the time, and Crystal Cove came out with set 3. So just with all the change that's happening, I'm excited to see how that's going to impact the game, and to see if things will be more balanced with the new limitations that they're putting on of 2v2 makes it so you have to approach the game from a very different way. Same thing with having to choose either all chronos or no chronos.
Yeah, and ultimately at the end of the day, we've seen some cards from set five, but there's obviously going to be a lot of new ones. Hopefully, some stuff that shakes up the meta. I think set four did shake up the meta a little bit. Obviously,
Oh, definitely.
not as much as existence wants, but I think as you release more sets, the possibilities do increase, whether
Exponentially.
explored or not explored, and eventually you're going to see things. You're going to stop seeing the same deck run. I think it doesn't blow me away. Like I'm not surprised that up until set four, the meta was pretty much just the one deck, right?
Hmm.
Um, Shard Folk and Tree Folk during set three, season one, they only had three creatures that were viable in either deck.
Yeah.
And now they have way more. I mean, Reveal just got a ton of support. Shardfolk got some decent support. Sure,
Yeah.
Angels got support, but they don't have like a cohesive theme besides just survivability. So, ultimately, like, and this set's going to provide more Shardfolk and Tree Folk support. So, those types are only going to get more, stronger and more variety. But the important thing is like players are always going to find a way to break your game.
Yep.
Like you have to kind of just accept that at some point, um, you're there's going to be a deck that's going to be S tier or A tier. Ultimate balance is just impossible, and people who just want to win are just always going to run that deck until it gets proven otherwise.
Right.
And so even when set five comes out, I think the best goal is just to try to have as many decks in a tier as possible. If set five comes out and there's still a beatdown deck that's S tier and that's the only deck that some people run, that sucks. But if there's two, three more B tier decks, four more A tier decks, then I think you still did a good job.
Definitely. And on top of that, the more that they introduce new cards, the more opportunities that people will have to decide what playstyles they like, and then existence games can kind of design around that, which is something that I think we should look forward to. You know, if if Shard Folk and Tree Folk had gotten no love in the future, if the more love we show to the particular strategies and styles that we want to play with, the more likely it is that they are going to design cards to fit in with that, or take the game in a direction that's kind of similar to that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, that about does it for this month's episode of the Thoughtstream. Do you have any other closing thoughts here, Alex?
Nope. Just really excited for the qualifiers that are coming up to see what kind of news that has for us.
Yeah. And I appreciate having you on. And well, I guess
Anytime.
we'll see you guys next month when we pretty much get close to Worlds in set 5.
Bye.
See ya.